Welcome back to the program. I am not going to be doing a monologue tonight because there's just too much that we have to get to. I want you to take a look at Nikki Haley again framing her loss as a win.
Today in South Carolina, we're getting around 40% of the vote. That's about what we got in New Hampshire too. I'm going to count it. I know 40% is not 50%. But I also know 40% is not some tiny group.
But it's still losing. My next guest ran Ted Cruz's 2016 presidential campaign, his 2018 Senate re-election campaign, and he's the founder of J2 Strategies. Jason Johnson, help me understand this. She keeps taking her losses and tries to frame them as wins. She just lost her state by 20 points in an open primary, which means Democrats were voting in the Republican primary, and she still lost.
Indeed. And in fact, if you look at the exit polling, Andrew, she likes to tout, 40%. I'm staying in it for the 40% that don't want a rematch between Biden and Trump. In reality, among Republicans, Donald Trump got 73% of the vote in the South Carolina primary. So this story is over with regard to who the nominee will be. You and I both know that. The question is, why on earth does she either not realize it or realizes it, meaning there is zero path for her to win the nomination, and continues on? That's the issue.
Look, I love Senator Ted Cruz, so when I ask this, it's not in any means the insult. But he was the last man standing. At some point, the campaign had to huddle around and say, okay, we don't have a path here, right? We can go on, but we saw that the Americans for Prosperity, they dropped the funding. That's one of the Koch brothers, or the remaining Koch brother. When do campaign staff say to her, look, this is about my resume as well. I'm not going to stick around for what is seemingly a pretty embarrassing thing that you're doing. You mathematically, Super Tuesday, Trump's going to have it locked up. When do staff start saying, I gotta move on?
Well, the ones who are in it for the right reason, which is to save this country from the disaster that has been Joe Biden, have already left. That I can guarantee you. Look, we had that night that you just mentioned in 2016. I remember it well. It was painful. It was hard. It was in Indiana. And yes, all of the senior advisors gathered around. We had a very sober look at the reality going forward. And it's hard on people. Look, it's hard on the candidate. It's hard on the people who are working on the campaign. It's really hard on the volunteers and the donors. But the reality is you have to deal with reality. And that's what we did then. They are not doing now. Look, Andrew, I think a big part of this, I was involved in a lot of meetings with high net worth Republican donors, the donor class, in this last presidential primary, where they were trying to figure out, is there any way to support someone who can defeat Donald Trump? And they all understood it would be really hard. But it was really interesting that they picked perhaps the one, let's say, tier one candidate in the primary who I knew from day one had no path to the Republican nomination, because Nikki Haley represents the George H.W., George W. Bush, Mitt Romney wing of the party. And in reality, when you talk to these people who still hold on to that nostalgia of that world that is no more, they still believe, Andrew, like when it comes to issues like sovereignty, border security, not spending ourselves into oblivion, right? They believe that that the voters that hold those positions truly are, quote, the fringe Donald Trump base. They can't wrap their head around the fact that if you go through the issues one by one, it's not a fringe Donald Trump base. It's 70+% of the Republican Party. And they struggle to accept that reality. And Nikki Haley is their proxy, pulling, doing everything they can to take us back to a day that thankfully we're not going back to.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. That was my thought when I saw Nikki Haley enter the race. The people that were supporting Ron DeSantis wanted a different but similar version of MAGA, right? Something they thought might have a better temperament. They wanted all the same things, they just wanted it wrapped in a different color wrapping paper. So when I looked at that, and I thought, okay, this is the whole MAGA is somewhere between the majority is somewhere between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. And Ron DeSantis was like, I don't see a path for me. I'm out. I was like, where does this candidate think her avenue is? And looking at some of the states, California, she's down like 60 points. In Texas, it's like 80 points. She can't make her stand in Arkansas or Alabama. The only place I even see her below 30 is in Vermont and Massachusetts. And those are not crucial states for Republicans to win. I got a minute left.
You bet. And you mentioned California and Texas. As I know you know, Andrew, California changed the rules to be essentially a winner-take-all state. You got half the delegates up on Super Tuesday. Donald Trump most likely will secure the delegates needed for him to be the nominee. And she's saying she still won't drop out. There's no question that the Koch network backing away was a huge step towards her backing out. You asked a moment ago, when do those people in the room who say I care about my own resume finally walk away? I told you one level are the ones that earn it for the right reason. The other is when they go to cash their checks and they don't clear the bank. And that's what's going to happen.
Well, and again, everybody wants to be on the winning campaign, right? You might start out a true believer, and I could see that you were a true believer of Ted Cruz. I believed in Ted Cruz, but you know, if it's about being part of the winning team, at some point you have to say, look, it's not about how I feel or how you feel. It's what is, and this isn't happening. So this is my profession. I need to move on. All right, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it. Good to see you.
All right, coming up, the FBI battered down the door of a former Marine who wasn't even accused of violent action on January 6th. Julie Kelly joins me next.